For tonight's question time, we've come to Belfast. Our audience reflects the electoral picture across Northern Ireland. Welcome to Question Time on BBC iPlayer and Sounds. The Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Hilary Benn. He's a Labour Party veteran, having been an MP since 1999 and served as International Development Secretary in Tony Blair's government. For the Conservatives, Alex Burghart is the shadow Northern Ireland Secretary. He's the MP for Brentwood and Ongar in Essex. John Finucane is the Sinn Féin MP for Belfast North. He also served as the city's former Lord Mayor and is a human rights lawyer. The DUP's Director of Elections and Campaigns is Jonathan Buckley. He's the youngest person to represent the party at Stormont and says it must become Northern Ireland's party of common sense. And Aoife Moore is a columnist for the Irish Times and author of The Long Game Inside Sinn Féin, a warts-and-all portrait of the party's recent history. Good evening. Welcome to the programme, welcome to our panel and welcome to our audience here in Belfast. Very good to see you. Thank you for coming and spending your evening with us. We're going to start the programme with questions in just a moment, but before we do, I just wanted to give our panel a moment to reflect on the terrible events that have taken place in Manchester today with the attack on a synagogue. I'm sure you know about it. It's been all over the news. 2 people have been killed, along with the alleged attacker. 4 people are in hospital. A horrifying attack. Hilary.
It's simply appalling, and tonight we need to hold the families of those who died, those who are injured, in our hearts. We need to express solidarity with them because the Jewish community all over the country will be really frightened tonight about what happened earlier today in Manchester. I was in touch with the Chief Constable earlier today about security arrangements. You may have seen what the Prime Minister said about stepping those up. This is a terrible moment, and especially on this very special day for the Jewish faith, Yom Kippur, which is all about atonement and repentance. It's just so shocking. And we need to come together. We mustn't be divided, we must come together.
Alex.
I just think it's absolutely enraging and depressing. This terrible sense that this has happened again. This dreadful idea that there are families in Manchester going home this evening knowing that they will never see those people again. And it's heartbreaking. And there can be no justification for this. There can be no excuse for it. This is something that obviously, although we don't know all the details yet, bears all of the hallmarks of anti-Semitic extremist terrorism, and we have to drive it out. We cannot have this in our society.
John.
I welcome the opportunity to make our collective thoughts known at the beginning of the programme tonight. It's a horrific attack. My thoughts are with the families of those who have lost loved ones today. It was an exceptionally cowardly attack, and I want to pay tribute to the emergency services who responded. We don't know all of the details yet, but it certainly appears that members of the public acted in a fashion that was not just selfless, but brave, and possibly ensured that we weren't dealing with an even bigger tragedy than we already are. But it is important that on a day like today and in the time ahead, that those in a position of responsibility think about their rhetoric, about their language, because there will be people out there who are feeling vulnerable, who may not be directly impacted by the attack in Manchester, but are attacked indirectly as a result of this. And I think that unification of message is incredibly important, and I think it's more than right that we all take that opportunity tonight to do so.
It truly is devastating. Can we begin for one moment just to think about the pain and the anguish that community in Manchester is feeling right now? Those that perhaps prevented further death at the synagogue, those that have the anguish of going home to a family home with somebody missing from the dinner table. I think it's truly shocking. there is a real sense of vulnerability, and I know well because there's a small Jewish community in Belfast, and they have been subject to relentless attack over many years, and sometimes it can be low level, but in other cases they've had their headstones defaced, they've had anti-Semitic rhetoric online and in person, and when I speak to them over this past few years, it has been we simply just feel like we have to keep our heads down. And I think that's disgraceful. And ultimately, the shocking scenes on our TVs tonight will build that sense of vulnerability right across the UK. And we need to demonstrate by our actions and our words that we stand in full score solidarity with our Jewish neighbours in the United Kingdom. They deserve that at the very least. In Northern Ireland, we know all too well what terrorism does to communities, to families, to those involved in the aftermath, the law enforcement. And right now, my thoughts are primarily with those affected, but be assured we'll continue to be with you in the days ahead.
Aoife.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we know better than a lot of places what political violence does in this part of the world. And I was really taken with the early reports I read today that members of the public and the security that were there at the synagogue intervened to help each other. Manchester itself is not a stranger to political violence and terrorism. And what we saw over the last number of years in the wake of those terrorist attacks was a community that really stood together. And I think community is what's going to save us all. And I think, to be going to temple or synagogue on a holy day, and I think there's a certain level of cowardice in someone who would carry out that type of disgusting act. But I really believe in the people of Manchester, and my thoughts are very much with them today.
Okay. Let's take our first question, which is from Paul Gray.
Why do the government and left-wing politicians continue to call concerned citizens far right when the vast majority are just concerned about illegal immigration?
Right, so we mentioned rhetoric already. Hilary, let me come to you. Obviously, Keir Starmer at the Labour conference today referred to a policy of reform as a racist policy when it comes to immigration.
Yeah.
I mean, racist, far right. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do, because if you look at what Reform has proposed on indefinite leave to remain, because controlling migration is absolutely right and proper. It's something the government is committed to, which is why we are making changes to the immigration system. That is one thing, tightening up the rules for settlement and so on. It is completely different to say to people who have lived in this country for a long time, paid taxes, worked, contributed, that their right to remain in Britain, we gave a promise, could be taken away from them and they could be deported. And when people think about it, who do you know who has indefinite leave to remain? It could be the carer who's looking after your ill mother. It could be your neighbour. It could be an in-law. It could be the doctor who treated you at the hospital. And I think it is an immoral policy, and the Prime Minister was quite right to call it out, because it is, in the end, divisive. And as we've just discussed in the wake of the terrible events in Manchester today, there are enough people out there who want to divide the nation, and we should be trying to bring people together and have a sensible debate about the difference between proper controls on migration and not breaking the word that we've given to people about their ability to continue to contribute to this country.
The question was asked about concerned citizens, not about reform, but about concerned citizens, which there is a vast majority that are concerned about illegal immigration, which I don't think you answered.
And do you feel that they are being wrongly referred to as far right?
Wrongly referred to as far right, as well as being ignored.
I accept that there are many people who are concerned about migration. That is why the government is taking a number of steps.
Paul's point is that you feel that they're being called far right, when in fact they're not. That's your view.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I don't accept that the government is doing that. We've called out what Nigel Farage proposed and Reform proposed, but we're also making changes to the immigration system, which I hope people will recognise as they unfold, say changing the arrangements for getting indefinite leave to remain. People have to make a contribution, not be claiming benefits, spotless criminal record, all of those things that we've announced, looking at the way in which the European Convention of Human Rights is interpreted, not leaving it, because if we left the European Convention, we'd be in a club of three in Europe: Russia, Belarus, and the United Kingdom. And there are parties on the panel that are in favour of us leaving.
Alex.
Look, in answer to your question, there isn't, I haven't seen any justification for the use of those terms. And you're right, there are a lot of people who are concerned about levels of immigration. They're perfectly entitled to hold those views and to not be shouted down. And before I was a politician, I was a history teacher. And in my lifetime, I have watched people take words that meant one thing in the 1930s and try to apply them to entirely different situations in the modern age and distort them. Far right used to mean the Nazis who rounded people up and committed the worst atrocities in history and put them in camps and murdered them. It's now used to accuse people who raise concerns about immigration of being the same thing. It's totally unacceptable. What's happened here, very clearly, is that the Prime Minister went to Labour Party conference and did not want to talk about all of the scandals enveloping his government, didn't want to talk about Angela Rayner, he didn't want to talk about Peter Mandelson, didn't want to talk about Morgan McSweeney, he didn't want to talk about the state of the economy. What he tried to do was distract everybody from that by saying something stupid. And unfortunately, he had a degree of success with that. I don't think we should put up with it. I think we should talk about the main issues and not be calling each other names.
Woman there, in the middle.
I believe in an inclusive society, but I think when Paul said that people were concerned, they're concerned because they see it as an insidious erosion of our culture and identity. And Mr. Benn, your government don't seem to want to protect that. In the south of Ireland, there's been a 10% rise in population. In the last consensus in 2023 in the south of Ireland, there was 20% of the people identified as not being born in the country. I think that was a conservative estimate, and I believe it's probably more like 30%.
I mean, obviously, we don't know that statistic, I should just point out.
Yes, but I feel that the UK will soon be going in that direction and will soon reach those figures.
Okay, can I just take issue with the terms like insidious erosion of our culture? That is... This is our human beings that we are talking about. We know in this part of the world what it's like to go away, to get a job, to start a new life away from war, and how we were treated when we moved away. I think what's happened to Keir Starmer is that Nigel Farage is dragging him round by the tail. I think he is hemorrhaging votes on the right and the left, and what he's struggling to do is explain to people that the reason you're on a housing waiting list and the reason that the NHS is underfunded and that your child can't get a special school place is not because of immigrants. It is because of successive governments in Westminster, and in this part of the country, that is the reason as well. And now Keir Starmer has decided to go after people like delivery drivers and bring in something like a brickyard. None of that is going to build houses here. None of that is going to bring school places, and none of it is going to fix the NHS. We need to be very careful when politicians start punching down, because it means they don't have any policies that can help you.
I think it's important in these kind of discussions, because they can tend to get very sort of emotive very quickly, is to sort of look at the facts. And there were figures out this week or last week that showed that in the last 12 months, the population of Northern Ireland has grown by like a fraction of a percent. It's been quite small in the grand scheme of things, and the context is different in the Republic and different in GB. But I think here we have to be very wary of what is really happening here and not sort of somewhere else that we see, and try and get caught up in those kind of conversations. The most important thing, I think, is to deal with this as it happens and as it sort of affects us.
Well, let's just get to some statistics then. So 3.4% of the population in Northern Ireland is from an ethnic minority. That compares to England and Wales, where it's over 18%. But in Northern Ireland, just in 2011, it was 1.8. So it has gone up, but it's still very small.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to hide behind some of the statistics. And I actually agree with the original question, because it has been a deliberate attempt by Labour and previously the Conservative government to brand anybody that showed any concern with illegal and uncontrolled immigration as racist. That was wrong. And I'll tell you why. Because people with genuine, heartfelt lived experience, seen as... So I looked, for example, in Belfast. It is the second highest dispersal rates for asylum seekers from hotels into accommodation in local communities. Right? HMOs have changed the landscape of some of our communities. It is without doubt that immigration, particularly the cost associated, has had a dramatic impact. And I listen how people can say, well, it's not because of the levels of illegal immigration that's affecting our health service and GP access and housing and school places. But look at the figures. 15.3 billion across the UK by 2029 to provide asylum accommodation and support. That's not including other costs such as legal costs.
Sorry, 15.3 billion what?
Pounds right across the UK for housing asylum seekers and other associated costs. In Northern Ireland alone, that figure will balloon to 400 million. Now, this is the point.
That's assuming the status quo remains.
Yes, and it may well get worse. And it has got worse when we look at the statistics. 50,000 people came by boat into GB in this past year. That's what we know of. But let's look at what that money could actually do. Could that money fund healthcare? Could it help to... The 400 million alone would be the entire capital budget for education in Northern Ireland alone. So I do not accept that anybody that has a legitimate concern in relation to illegal and uncontrolled immigration is racist. That's lazy politics. Just this week, David Lammy tried to insinuate that Nigel Farage was in some way connected to the Hitler Youth. How low can you go? The Labour government are catching on very quick. The silent majority want common sense. They want border enforcement, and they want to ensure that this country, that those that come to it, respect our laws, contribute, and most importantly, ensure that our culture and our values are not in competition with theirs.
Man here in the glasses.
I completely agree with Jonathan. Just going back to Hilary's point, saying that reform's rhetoric is divisive. The Prime Minister of the country said a few months ago that we risk becoming an island of strangers. Why isn't that divisive? But as soon as it is, Nigel Farage will say it. It's racist. His supporters are far right. He's far right. But when Keir Starmer says it, it's an accident. It's a mistake.
Okay, man here with the blonde hair. Yes.
To target someone on the basis of where they come from or their identity or ethnicity in particular, that is racist. Mm-hmm. So I don't see how it could be described any other way. I understand that people are having to deal with the cost of living being untenable, but that's nothing to do with where people are coming from. Mm-hmm.
Okay, you made your point. Leave a woman here in the front.
Can I just say, over the summer we had riots and vigilante groups here, and a lot of politicians came out and said that, well, these people had legitimate concerns. We've had 28 women murdered in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. It seems like there's less appetite to come out and riot whenever the perpetrator looks like someone you might work with or play football with.
I completely endorse that point, and unfortunately my own constituency in North Belfast witnessed some horrific racist attacks and intimidation, and there's an ability to come out and condemn that without using the word but at the end of it, and I don't see enough of that whenever we talk about acts of racism and intimidation or sectarianism that was quite rampant in this part of the world, certainly at the beginning of the summer. I think the debate itself, for me, is primarily focused in England at the minute, whether it's reform or whether it's the points that have been made between Hilary and Alex so far this evening. But this conversation, and it goes back to the question, I'm not avoiding that, this conversation demands accuracy and integrity when we talk about it. So there is a way in which you can ask a question on immigration which has integrity and accuracy at its heart, or you may have an honest appetite to get information that is relevant to that. But there's also another way to go about that conversation, and unfortunately that's what we've seen too much of. We've seen that type of dog whistle politics. We've already seen it so far this evening with statistics being thrown here, there and everywhere. The issues that the issues that come into my door in my constituency office, the issues that I talk about with people on the street or people who are asking for our help, is not on the boats that are coming up Belfast Lough, the way some local politicians would have you believe, because that's completely fanciful. It's about cost of living. It's about demanding a better outcome from Westminster. It's about seeing an executive working together to tackle the problems in our health service. We need more workers coming into particularly that area of life, as well as delivering on everything else. So I do take issue with anybody who would infer that the number one issue here is around migrants. We've already had the statistic that there's only 3.4% of ethnic minorities that live in this part of the world that call it home. For me, anybody who wants to call this place home, we have a duty to put our arms around them and make them feel as welcome as possible.
So unlimited immigration into Northern Ireland. Is that what you're saying?
No, let's
well, I just think you say anyone who wants to come here, you need to welcome them. I just wanted to know what you meant by that.
I didn't appreciate you were going to jump on that word, but I see Johnny is trying to do the same as well.
That is what you want.
So let's make it very clear. Nobody would want that. And let's be very clear about that. Any responsible government or authority around the world wants to have a lawful, legally compassionate and enforced and resourced immigration policy. To say that anybody is for open borders is nonsensical, and it goes back to the point that I'm making about accuracy.
Well, I was only reflecting which
sorry, I wasn't directing that at you. I was directing that at Johnny, who's saying that that's exactly what I want. It isn't what I want. It is not what Sinn Féin wants. You do have the ability, and there are examples of this, to talk about immigration, to have an immigration policy, which obviously isn't evolved in this part of the world. It comes from Westminster, but to have an immigration policy that needs to be resourced, because that's a big problem in this as well, and needs to be enforced. But there's an ability to do that that is completely compliant with human rights and international law, where you are treating people with compassion and not in the way in which we've heard some people talk so far this evening.
Briefly. But John, that's part of the problem, because your actions don't match the rhetoric. Because not so long ago in the Northern Ireland Assembly, I brought a motion calling for action on uncontrolled and illegal immigration. Your party voted it down. So you can say what you want in the audience tonight, but your actions do not bear out that you're a party that is serious with illegal immigration. No, but it showed the sentiment. And here's the other problem. There's a huge conversation happening across Northern Ireland right now. There are people from traditional nationalist and Republican backgrounds, alongside unionists and loyalists, who feel that enough is enough when it comes to pansying around on illegal immigration. Control our borders.
Did you just say pansying around?
Yes, control our borders and restore order, and that's certainly a policy that I'll be pushing for and continue to.
I mean, that is a word that is often used as a derogatory term for people who are homosexual. Is that what
you
mean?
No, that is exactly not what I mean.
That is exactly what that word means.
No, that is not what I mean. I say very, very clearly, that is not what I mean. I'm saying clearly to the audience tonight, there's a conversation happening in Northern Ireland. Other people want to deflect from it. Let's get serious. Let's ensure that we have border policies that reflect a country that is in control of its borders.
All right, I'm going to, if you forgive me, I'm going to move on, because I think if I've got a number of questions to get through, and I'm not going to manage it unless I take a move on. Before I do, I'm just going to say where we are next week, which is Shrewsbury. So if you live in or around Shrewsbury, you'd like to come and be part of the programme, go to the Question Time website, follow the instructions there. And the week after that, we're in Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire. So Shrewsbury and then Bishop Stortford. Come and be part of the programme. We would love to see you. Right, let's take another question. Relevant, very relevant to where we are. Donal, where are you sitting?
Is it time for an end to the power sharing in Northern Ireland? It's delivered peace, or helped deliver peace, for 27 years, with very little else.
What would you like to happen?
I'm not too sure. We need to get some way, because the executive, the two parties have dominated the executive for the past 27 years when they choose to take their seats, which, and for long periods, they haven't. And there's lots of things they haven't delivered on. Very, very little.
John?
The short answer is no. I believe in power sharing. I've talked quite a lot before about the first time that I cast my vote in my adult life was for the Good Friday Agreement. I believe in power sharing. I believe that it is much more than an extension of just ending the violence. And I think there are good examples over the years where, when all parties who have a mandate to be round an executive table, when they have that political will to work together to deliver, there are examples when that can happen. Are there challenges? Of course there are challenges, but we have seen the alternative. We have seen what direct rule delivers, or more importantly, doesn't deliver whenever that has had to be put in place. And I am a firm believer that decisions taken for people in this part of Ireland are best made by people in this part of Ireland, and that's something that I'm committed to. I know our First Minister is committed to, and that is something that I want to see all parties commit to, because despite the challenges that I've touched on, that is how we actually can deliver for people.
Are we going to have another 27 years of election?
Well,
with little achieved?
I don't mean to be glib, but I think that the question brings up an extension of where local power sharing and the devolved institutions go to. And it's that part of the Good Friday Agreement which will say that it is for the people of this island to decide their constitutional future. So as an Irish Republican, as a proud Sinn Féin MP, I obviously want to see the ending of partition. I want to see the ending of our links with Westminster. But that is something that can be done in a very managed and responsible fashion. But until such times as those questions are put to the people, I fully believe that the best people to make the decisions for people here are elected politicians here.
So, Aoife, Donal clearly feels that decisions just aren't being taken.
Yeah.
It's a form of stasis.
I absolutely believe the people in this region should make the decisions and the democratic process. Stormont's not working. It's not working for anybody, right? 6 pieces of primary legislation have been passed since January. 6. One of them was to do with their own expenses. Mother and baby home, climate change, childcare costs, none of this is being tackled by Stormont. I find it quite strange that John didn't mention United Ireland as the first part of his answer, considering he's a Sinn Féin politician. I don't think Stormont is working. As a young person who had to move away to get a good job, we have a huge brain drain in this part of the world where young, brilliant students are moving away because they don't feel like they have opportunities here. We've had 27 years of relative peace, and I don't think Colm Eastwood, the MP for the SDLP, actually said recently it was easier to get things done when Stormont wasn't sitting than when it is, and that is a terrible indictment of the place.
Okay. Man in the check shirt.
We just talked in the previous question around how we're in 2025, it's a multicultural society, and can we ever really expect Stormont to work when within Stormont and within our education system we still designate on Protestant, Catholic or other? Is that really what our society breaks down to? Protestant, Catholic or other?
All right. Man in front of you.
I think we've two sides of the divide sitting each side of the table here. I think until the removal of the veto that any of these two parties can have, we'll never see progression. At the time, the Good Friday Agreement that came in was right for the time. I think it has to evolve, like everything, it has to evolve. And until we remove a situation where John's party or Jonathan's party can decide that they want to throw the rattle out the pram because they don't like what's going on, then we're bound to repeat ourselves. Thank
you. That man is basically saying, stop throwing the rattle out of the pram. Is that what you're doing?
It's a very important topic because, look, I always look at it like this. Stormont is not a panacea, and it's never going to be. I think we have to be realistic. We've come from a very difficult place. There are people living in Northern Ireland that have diametrically opposed constitutional positions. And that's a fair aspiration. I don't deny that to anybody. There are people in our executive that have diametrically opposed positions on the economy, on social issues, and they're right to hold those positions. But we can't look at it through the eyes of perfection. What we have is something that we have to continually work at. We have to continually be prepared to deal with issues that we can find mutual agreement on, and sometimes it means parking issues that we can't. But absolutely, from my perspective, and indeed my party's perspective, devolution can be difficult, but it is absolutely essential to the people of Northern Ireland when it comes to local decision making. I have seen in my time as an elected representative how whenever we go through periods of direct rule, we really see the erosion of communities, whether that be from an educational perspective, from a business perspective, from a general community perspective. They don't have the ability to reach their decision makers, those direct elected politicians, to make decisions on their behalf. And there is work that's happening. Yes, it's slow. It's a very difficult context in terms of our UK-wide economy at the moment, but we have to keep at it, and we owe that to the generations that came before.
Man here.
I'm just getting a bit nervous, just being a general electorate here. And I think the reason is because Jonathan and his friends are now losing power, and there's this extreme form of unionism coming through in Northern Ireland. And the more Jim Allister and his mates start getting a grip in this place, Jonathan is going to try and toe the party line from reform and just be popular like they always do. And it's just going to drag us back, so it won't be long before Stormont's down again.
So you're mentioning the leader of a party that's not here at the table, there's tradition and unionist voice, Jim McAllister. Yes, man at the very back.
What's the problem with one party running the country here in Northern Ireland and the rest of the parties can get into opposition? Because the bottom line is, if that happened now, Sinn Féin would be running Northern Ireland. And if they don't do a good job, then they'll get voted out at the next election. And that might take away the green, the orange situation, because you'd have nationalist Republicans, if they're not doing a good job with the health service, the education authority, then their own electorate's going to say, no, we've had enough of you, we're going to try something else.
Hilary? Is that a way around it?
I don't agree with the solution that you proposed, sir, because power sharing was essential to allow Northern Ireland to move forward. That was the condition that allowed the Good Friday Agreement to be signed and then voted on, 70% of the people in Northern Ireland voted for it. But the truth is that power sharing arrangement, and compulsory coalition is very difficult, also contains the seeds of its own destruction. And as we all know, power sharing has been down far too many times, and the people of Northern Ireland have been very badly served by politicians of one party and then another walking away from their responsibilities. If we stand for elected office, there might be days where ministers feel this is all a bit tricky. I wonder if I could just walk away from this for a bit. Well, I tell you, if we tried to do that elsewhere in the United Kingdom, our voters would tell us pretty sharpish, get back to work. And there's a responsibility on politicians here to make this work and to deal with the problems. And we can see what they are in Northern Ireland, which also has so much going for it. You look at the economic success, the investment that is coming into Northern Ireland, the ingenuity, the innovation, which I spoke about in Liverpool this week. The politicians have got to make it work. But in the end, the solution lies with all of you because you all have a vote.
Alex.
Well, I think it's clear that some things aren't working as well as they should, as well as people in Northern Ireland deserve to have them working. That I think about there's a premium of about 20% per head on public services here than there is in places like my constituency in Essex, and yet the health waiting times that people have to put up with here are totally unacceptable.
Yep.
Now, that's obviously partially down to the fact that institutions have sometimes collapsed, and it's partially down to the fact that sometimes you have to make difficult decisions, and it requires both sides to compromise, and that has proved very difficult to do. And I say these things not to take away from the accomplishments of the 1998 agreement, or indeed of the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister right now. But it is very important that if power sharing is going to continue, it can show that it actually can deliver for people here in Northern Ireland. And I think that is what is going to be in everyone's mind as we go into the next Stormont term, which I think starts in 2026.
Fiona,
okay.
Can I just come in?
Because I need to get on to another question.
Can I just say that the reason the NHS is in the state it's in Northern Ireland is not because Stormont was collapsed, it's because of decades of underfunding by conservative
government. Oh, come on, that's just total rubbish.
No.
It really is. People in Northern Ireland receive more money per head in funding than they do in my constituency. It's how the money is spent. And, and you take that up with your politicians, but don't go blaming Westminster. I don't agree with Hilary on very much, but he got a pretty good funding settlement at the last budget. He got a better funding settlement than my constituents get in Essex.
You don't agree that the Conservative government have any impact on what the state of the NHS right now? You don't think the Conservatives have any issue there?
I think that you need to check your facts about public sector funding.
Well, just to be clear,
per
capita health spending in Northern Ireland is around 7% higher than England and has been since 2002, which I think is the stat you're referring to. Let me take another question from Francis Kavanagh.
Given the experience of the peace process here, has the Israeli-Palestine peace plan drawn up by Donald Trump any chance of working if the Palestinian people are not involved in the process?
Well, I think that's a particularly interesting question to ask here in Northern Ireland. John, let me start with you. Because obviously we have had the peace process here.
Yeah.
And we had a Conservative and a Labour government who ended up talking to people that both governments classed as terrorists, but they got in the room with them, and the people of Northern Ireland were offered a vote on the Good Friday Agreement.
The last time your show came from here was roughly about 2 years ago, and I spoke on that occasion about the need for all sides directly and all sides globally to create the conditions for peace, and that peace processes by their very nature are difficult. They involve speaking and engaging with those that you consider as your enemy and not necessarily making peace with your friends. And one thing that struck me, which is referenced in the question from the plan that was announced this week, was the complete absence of Palestinians in that plan. And there also has to be serious questions asked about the credibility of Israel as a sincere partner for peace in any negotiations going forward.
And about Hamas, presumably you agree with that.
Well, this is a government that actually bombed the negotiators in Qatar. This is a government that has been found guilty of genocide time and time again over the past 2 years. I remain to be convinced that this Israeli government is committed or wants a peace settlement.
And do you think Hamas are committed and want a peace settlement?
That's well, I don't know. I think the last reports that I saw is that Hamas are considering what this plan is that has been announced.
The BBC understands that they're going to turn it down.
Well then anything that would contribute to an increased cycle of violence is to be condemned and is to be met with increased disappointment, because the people who are suffering disproportionately are the Palestinian people. They are being pummeled into the ground, into effectively non-existence if this is allowed to continue. And if this peace plan is not embedded, and I have severe doubts whether it will, because primarily of the credibility of both the US administration and this Israeli government, then all governments, all Western leaders need to step up and create real conditions, have tough conversations. Stop arming Israel, for one, would be a good start. I mean, and today... I have to take this opportunity because within the past 24 hours, a party colleague of mine has been kidnapped by the Israeli government. He was part of the flotilla that was intercepted in international waters.
Is that the flotilla with Greta Thunberg?
Yes. Yeah. This is a party colleague, a senator...
When you say they've been kidnapped?
They have been... You can't arrest somebody in international waters. Let's call this what it is. One person's detention. They have been kidnapped. There is no lawful basis to take these people in international waters. I don't have enough time to go through the roll call of crimes that have been committed over the past 2 years, let alone going back in decades. But there needs, if we are serious about creating the conditions for peace, then there needs to be a step change in how this Israeli government has been indulged over the past 2 years specifically.
I welcome the peace plan. It has the support of the Arab partners, and that is very, very important. What is the single most important thing? The fighting stops, the hostages are released, and the aid gets in. That is what is required. And we long to see the day when that happens, and I hope that Hamas will agree to the plan. To come to your point, sir, the lesson from Northern Ireland, it seems to me, is crystal clear. Of course, there can't be a long-term sustainable peace without the Palestinian people being involved. That is why the government recently in New York said we joined others in recognising a Palestinian state. What is the lesson from Northern Ireland? The lesson is it's only when the parties to the conflict are prepared to put their weapons aside, to compromise, to reach out their hand and say, we're going to have to work together to share what is a small piece of land, and that's certainly true in Israel and the Palestinian territories. Unless that happens, then we won't see any progress. And what does that require? It requires courageous political leadership. It was courageous political leadership here in Northern Ireland that brought the peace process. It is unfortunately, tragically, completely absent today on the part of the Palestinians and the Israelis. I long for the day when those leaders emerge and say, this is what we're going to do for peace.
Man here in the glasses.
It was part of the Northern Ireland peace process that the paramilitaries had to disarm. Like you said, it came out today, the BBC reported that Hamas are not going to accept this because their leverage is gone. Exactly. So, like was said, this agreement has been approved by the Arab countries. This is a Hamas problem for not accepting this. This is a good deal endorsed by the US, fair enough, depending on how you view their government, endorsed by the other Arab countries. Hamas are not going to accept this. You cannot blame Israel for that not being accepted. You can blame Hamas.
Woman here.
Sorry, I would just like to say the Conservative politician sitting beside John, you were shaking your head no. My question is, when is enough is enough? 65,000 people have lost their lives, and please don't say Israel have the right to defend themselves. The world knows what Israel has the right to do. You're watching it. You're letting them do it. Britain and America are backing each other to the hilt. You're arming those people. You're slaughtering those innocent men, women, children. And you really don't care.
I can assure you that everyone cares about it very, very much. And I'm afraid that it's accusations like that just throw these arguments off into the same dead ends and cul-de-sacs that we go over and over and on. As the gentleman over here was saying, there's a very simple truth that everybody, all of the countries that recognised Palestine the other day, or most of the countries in the Middle East, the United States of America, our own country, they all say that there cannot be a solution whilst Hamas is in power in Gaza. And I think deep down, we all know that there is absolutely no chance at all of Hamas laying down its weapons. It is not going to give up its power in Gaza. It is not going to go quietly into the night. It is going to carry on fighting, and it is going to carry on demanding the destruction of the State of Israel. So if somebody has a brilliant solution to that problem, I'd love to hear it, but it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
Hang on. If you haven't got a microphone, we can't hear. I'll come to you in a minute. Yes, the woman here.
Something that wasn't written into the Good Friday Agreement and I personally think should have been is that egos should be done away with.
Egos?
Egos. Egos are killing children. They are causing wars. People who can't put their ego in their back pocket and put people and children first are causing more wars. Stupidity causes more wars than badness.
Aoife.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of hope for this peace agreement. I think when one side bombs the negotiators of another, you can kind of guess that they're not that interested in negotiating. One of the Israeli cabinet ministers said last week that even with this peace deal, he said, I feel like our children will be forced to fight in Gaza again. They're not planning on stopping. This is, and the Irish state are arguing for this as well, that this is a genocide, and we're watching it being live streamed into our homes, and politicians talk out of both sides of their mouth, and they send aid, but they allow licenses for parts of weapons to be sent to Israel. I feel like this might be a watershed moment for us, and when history looks back, our children will ask us, why didn't people stop this when it was happening? Like I asked my granddad about World War II, why didn't we do something? Because we all know what's happening, and no one is doing anything to stop it.
What more do you think the UK could do to... I mean, it looks as if the only person Israel is going to listen to is Donald Trump. You've talked about the UK government stopping selling weapons.
Yeah.
Other than that, what else do you think the government...
I think there needs to be real consequences for Benjamin Netanyahu. He breaks every rule. He is currently under investigation, and he's been welcomed with open arms. We have seen...
Here in the UK,
I think, first of all, the 15% of components that they're sending for fighter jets that still have license to be sent to Israel
you've made the point about weapons. I just wondered if there was anything else.
I think sanctions are the only way to do it. I think Keir Starmer should have the bravery and the leadership to say we are no longer going to stand by this, but Keir Starmer won't even call it a genocide.
Hilary.
Well, on the last point, it is, of course, it is for the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice to make that judgment. But look, all of us would agree that what is going on in Gaza at the moment is appalling, awful.
But what about the
But the point is, if it were the case that it was the efforts of other countries that could bring the war in Gaza to an end, then your point would have force. What I tried to say in answer to the gentleman's question was, it can be stopped tomorrow if the two parties to the conflict will take the step required to bring it to an end. Now, we can say, well, Hamas won't give up their arms. There was a time in Northern Ireland when people said that about the paramilitaries. In the end, they did. And it's when they did that that the peace came to Northern Ireland. And therefore the responsibility, indeed, on Hamas is to follow the path that we have seen here in Northern Ireland that brought the peace that we all now enjoy.
Man at the very back.
I also just want to add, how does it make you feel that since Israel launched its genocide in Gaza, 248 Palestinian journalists have been killed while reporting the genocide?
Okay.
I don't want to see anybody killed anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think we all have to be very mindful of what has happened in the Middle East over the course of the last few years. There's been no mention whatsoever tonight of the 1,195 people that were butchered in Israel on October the 7th. That doesn't justify the murder of anybody thereafter. But the President Trump peace plan, whilst may not be perfect, it is a plan. And
but what about the point of the original question that it's not involving the Palestinian people?
Well, it's quite a significant achievement that there is so many Arab countries that have bought into it in the beginning. It is regrettable that Hamas has what it seemed to be indicated that they won't even give it a chance. And that actually maybe says more about what their intentions are. Because at least with the President Trump plan, one of the prerequisites was the return of hostages, 48 of whom are still missing, 20 that are believed to be alive. That is a prerequisite for any peace deal in the Middle East. And sadly, what we hear, there's a lesson for Northern Ireland that I see clearly. Do not reward terrorism, because if you do, they will continue to come back and back again for more gains. Whenever the UK recognised a state of Palestine, they essentially legitimised what Hamas did on October the 7th. That is my view. They legitimised it because Hamas were able to say that their cause was just, and there was no just for what they did on that day. So it's my hope that there's a lasting peace. I would hope that people would give this plan a chance, because without it, where are we? More killing, hostages continuing to linger in tunnels, die. Common sense.
I'm going to move on. What's happening in Gaza is also an incredibly important subject. We've done it many times on Question Time. We will continue to do it, I know. But I want to fit this last question in. It's a change of tone, if nothing else. Julie, off you go.
Was the appalling behaviour of American fans at the Ryder Cup symptomatic of Donald Trump's America?
Right. So, a little smashing of applause there. OK, so, context. Europe beat the USA. It was very close. In the Ryder Cup New York last weekend. There was an awful lot of abuse coming at, I presume also the American players, but I mean an awful lot of abuse coming at the European players. The Ryder Cup is known for a bit of that, but there was, according to Rory McIlroy at any rate, it was of a kind of different level of personal attacks. Things were being thrown, you know, all sorts of abuse about sexual predilections and you name it, it was all there. Culminating in one of the MCs for the event. She lost her job over this, but she was using a megaphone to lead a chant of F you, Rory, to Rory McIlroy. Aoife, I know you're not a massive golf fan, but I mean, this has been big news. Anyone who's been watching the Ryder Cup cannot fail to have noticed, but obviously big news here in Northern Ireland as well.
Yeah, what I took from it, I don't watch golf, but what I took from it was the level of homophobic and misogynistic abuse that was hurled at different golfers. And Rory McIlroy's wife, I apologise, I don't know the woman's name, but the sexist misogynistic abuse. A drink was thrown at her when she was there, and the homophobic abuse. And I think what we have seen, and back to the question, is since 2016 with the election of Donald Trump and all the candidacy that went with it, we have seen an increase in toxic political rhetoric. And we're no stranger to it in this part of the world, but there does seem to be more of an issue now when you watch American news, when you travel there. You know, it is very combative. Their politics is very combative, and, you know, ironic saying it here in Belfast. But I think what we have seen is an increase of misogyny, homophobia, all that type of bigotry, and it does meet itself out in sport. Sport does, at times, you know, kind of project that as well. And I'd just like to say, as the only woman on the panel, in the
we
most...
We did ask the politicians to come forward with a few female politicians, but it wasn't happening, I've got to say.
And we're in the most dangerous part of Europe to be a woman. I'm quite annoyed that there wasn't more questions about what we can do to tackle violence against women, but I think that misogyny that we saw at the Ryder Cup permeates everything that we do in our society, and we should do more to tackle it.
Listen, you are, of course, free to be annoyed about that. Can I just say that we choose our questions based on what the audience want to talk about? So if we had had a lot of questions about violence against women and girls, a very worthy subject, I completely agree with you on that, we would have done it. We didn't, so we're reflecting what the audience wanted to talk about. Hilary, are you a golfer?
No, not really. I was going to say that, I mean, golf has always struck me as a courteous and rather sedate sport. And I think, like everyone, although there's been a degree of raucousness associated with the Ryder Cup in the past, it was really, really shocking. I make the obvious point, we all have a responsibility for how we behave.
But the question is it symptomatic of Donald Trump's America? I know the government wants to be careful not to offend Donald Trump. We've seen that. But is your view that, I mean, the American Professional Golf Association said it has crossed a line, that the level...
Well, it definitely
Do you
crossed
think
a
it is
line.
symptomatic of the kind of
there's no
debate
doubt
that's going on
that
in America
political
at the time?
discourse in the United States of America has become a lot sharper and a lot less tolerant. My mum was an American, and Americans, my family and others, have always struck me as extremely courteous people and very friendly and welcoming. I think regardless of where the politics is, we, in the end, are responsible for how we choose to behave, and we should treat our fellow human beings with dignity and care.
All right, man in the red tie.
In the only game that I enjoy more than golf, that is football, fans acting like that would be sanctioned. Their next home game would be played in front of an empty stadium or in an empty stadium. I believe that the next Ryder Cup in America, that the American fans should be banned. It should be played without American fans.
Right, well, let's see how that goes down. OK, a woman there in the middle.
Yes, I do agree that I think it was awful what happened to Rory's wife and how she was treated. But I do agree also that it's a reflection of the political landscape and how politicians' rhetoric has changed towards each other. Would the panel agree that that rhetoric should be dialed back and a level of respectability and genuine empathy towards each other and the community as a whole would be better going forward, rather than using personal attacks in order to bring down your opponents?
Well, listen, I'm sure they'd all agree with that. Whether they do it or not is a very different matter. John, was the behaviour of the American fans that we saw at Ryder Cup symptomatic of Donald Trump's America?
I think the America under Donald Trump certainly has become, well, it appears from a distance, certainly become a lot more vocal. There is, I think, something that sneaks in into American culture. Maybe we just have an ability to see it more, where people can act without consequences. And to go to the root of the question, nobody wants to see passion removed from any sport. I'm not a golfer, but I listen to those who are, and I listen to those affected, Rory and Shane, who performed tremendously and did our country proud here. But they said that in that sport there is an etiquette, there is a line. They have played in raucous atmospheres before, but what happened last week for me was criminal. You know, to throw items at Rory's wife, to speak in the way that they did. It goes to the point that one of the contributors have made. There needs to be consequences for your actions. If that happened in a soccer stadium now, you would be banned, depending on what you say.
And is it anything to do with the kind of discourse promoted by Donald Trump? That's the question.
I wouldn't say I'm an authority to say that you can directly tie it to one political person, but what I would say on a wider point is that there is a responsibility on all of us, those who have the ability to enter into public discourse, but whether people are on social media, how you just treat your fellow human being, there is a responsibility on all of us to act a certain way, and we didn't see that last week.
Woman at the back.
I just wanted to say that when you mentioned how no one wants to, or politicians don't want to offend Donald Trump, I do wish that we could all be more like the wonderful former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, who outside the UN General Assembly called him out as a bully and said that we have to stand up to bullies, and maybe our politicians should be taking the
following the
advice from her.
same line. Jonathan?
Well, firstly, well done, Europe. A great victory as somebody that does follow a wee bit of golf. I don't play that well, but I certainly do follow it. I think golf, as Hilary has mentioned, the Ryder Cup is so out of character with what traditional golf culture actually is. It's a very respectable game. And I think there will be a self-inquest into what went on at the Ryder Cup.
But what about the question? Is it symptomatic of Donald Trump?
No, I don't believe it is. I believe that particularly the Ryder Cup has become so synonymous with great rivalry between Europe and the United States. Sometimes passion runs over in sport. That happens. Absolutely, the scenes with regards to Rory's wife were totally unacceptable, and there will be actions, I think, from that. There's plenty of footage to show that. But ultimately, sport is a passionate place, and I think the Ryder Cup particularly draws fans from a wider audience, not just those that are avid golf fans, because of that rivalry. I don't think that's going to disappear, but I don't think it's symptomatic of Donald Trump. There are many Americans that absolutely are into their sport and believe passionately that they wanted to see their team win. That bubbled over in many instances at this year's Ryder Cup.
Alex?
Look, it sounds horrible. I'm also not a close follower of golf, but the only sport I really follow is boxing, and I've never heard boxing fans behave in such a way at a boxing contest. So but to the original question, I think it's something else. I don't think it's the president. I think it's that the mode of communication we have with each other has changed very significantly over the past 20 years through things like social media. And that has changed the behaviour of a lot of people. And as other people on the panel have said, it's incumbent on us all to ensure that we mind our manners.
Man there in the grey top, yes, or white top, I think you've got on.
Yeah, I think it's completely symptomatic of Donald Trump's presidency. This is a man who has foreign leaders into the Oval Office and abused them in front of the world, and the same person who tries to censor people who don't agree with him whenever they're sort of trying to get any sort of political stance. So yes, this is completely symptomatic of Trump's America, and I think you'd struggle to find someone in the 21st century to be more divisive than that man.
Okay. Man in the black T-shirt. Yes,
I would say that the individuals that turned up to dish out the abuse to Rory McIlroy's wife and so on, they were going to do it no matter who was in power, whether it be Donald Trump or Biden. These guys turned up to abuse Rory McIlroy and others regardless. So I don't really see the Donald Trump connection. I just don't see it. They turned up no matter who was in power in the Oval Office. It just didn't matter. Them guys just turned up to abuse.
All right,
yeah.
All right. Man here in the front. Yes, you, sir.
Leadership's about setting an example, and it was noticeable that the example set by the American players on the Friday and the Saturday had a tendency to whip up the crowd a little bit more. Noticeable also to be balanced about this, that on the Sunday they toned it down a bit because someone had taken the leadership to have a word and to address the issue.
Okay. All right. I don't know how often we're going to end up talking about golf on Question Time. It's a first for me anyway, but thank you very much for your contributions. Our time is up. Thank you very much to you at home for watching. Thank you to the panel. And of course, thank you to our audience here in Belfast for coming along this evening. We are in Shrewsbury next week. Remember, if you want to come and be part of our audience. But for now, from Question Time in Belfast, good night. Well done, everybody.